but how they become law. And that is what this presentation is. So today I'll briefly walk you through the Michigan Legislative Services Bureau and the bill crafting process and why this matters to Junior League and SPAC. I do have a little bit of a Valentine's theme to this because I thought it was very appropriate. And please, as I go through, give me a holler if you have any questions along the way. So why this matters? Well, as SPAC members, we are shaping conversations around policy, civic engagement, and systematic change. And so understanding how these laws are drafted helps us to advocate more effectively and engage legislators with clarity and confidence. So by us knowing this as SPAC Junior League members, these are laws that shape, opportunities. It provides a stronger advocacy. And of course, this will help us understand the process. What is the Legislative Services Bureau? Well, it's a behind-the-scenes support system for Michigan lawmakers. It doesn't set policy. It ensures lawmakers have accurate, professional, and nonpartisan tools to do their job. So it was established back in 1941, and I'll be stressing throughout the presentation that it is a nonpartisan agency. Here are the makeup of the LSB divisions. So there is a legal division, and what the legal division does, and it's composed of attorneys and other staff, and they're provided information to legislators about the drafting and editing services. So the division drafts all the bills. They draft joint resolutions, and then any bill requests that are made from the legislative offices, it is assigned a drafting expert, someone who is specialized in a particular law or area, whether it's veterans or insurance, etc. So the legal division, they also handle a variety of other editorial responsibilities, including maintaining the computerized database of the Michigan PAL laws. So when a new law is introduced, they are responsible for making sure it's updated so the public has a view of them, any form of the administrative rules, and they want to make sure that the attorneys that are in this process have a good standing with the State Bar of Michigan. That's quite important. And then the Register Services Division. So this division provides objective, timely, and confidential information analysis to assist legislators. So these research attorneys make up the division and are experienced professionals, like I said before, and then it's available. What they do is they're available to legislative offices to answer any questions. They participate in work groups. I have had them come and help with like stakeholder meetings where because sometimes stakeholders will invite their lawyers, whether it's a nonprofit or a department. And so it's always good to have a legal team behind you so they're willing to support you on that and answer any questions that you may have that a staffer may not know. So the Legislative Printing Division, that is materials available from the LSB, and that includes like stationery, constituent newsletters, photos, labels. So they're very timely on any publication. And then information services, what they're responsible for is providing the legislator with consolidated chamber, automation, legislative drafting tools, and document management. So that's what that is. And I have these links here. I hope they're active for you. If you would like to click on those, you can absolutely look at your leisure. Are there any questions so far? Okay, great. So I think leadership really matters. So I wanted to point out who the current director and the senior executive assistant is. And this leadership, it matters to them for maintaining institutional integrity. So the LSB's leadership ensures continuity and professionalism at all times. So here's my little cherub there. It is grounded in law. LSB is grounded in law and the Michigan Constitution. This matters because it ensures fairness, transparency, and trust. And these are principles that align closely with the Junior League values. So the committee is made up of 12 regular and 6 alternative members, in which the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader each appoint 6 members. So they're from the minority party, along with 3 alternative members. So what the committee has the primary responsibility of providing staff for bill drafting, research, and other services to the legislature. By law, LSB provides drafting and advisory services only at the request of legislators. They are prompted through the legislative offices to start the drafting process. They don't take it upon themselves to do that. And so their role is to ensure that the legislation is clear, it's consistent, and legally sound. I also want to have you keep in mind that they do not influence in any way any kind of policy outcomes or suggestions unless asked. So nonpartisan and confidential, I keep making that point because the neutrality is critical. The LSV staff never advocate for or against any legislation. So that allows legislators and advocates like us to trust the integrity of the process. So this protects democracy. It allows legislators and advocates to trust that the process is fair, professional, and free from political influence. And I have to say that they're very strong in that. I'll give you a little tidbits here in this presentation, but so what they do is they draft materials that are protected until introduced. It's generally protected. And why I say generally is because although their office, it is very strict in confidentiality, and they provide equal service to all legislators, generally protected because they have no control what the offices do. Sometimes, and I've seen this happen, it's happened, in the House when I was working, that staffers will nonchalantly have conversations with other staffers about what they're doing in their office, what kind of legislation they're drawing up, and that's not something that you want to do. I always tell my interns, my staffers that would come in, I would say, this is Vegas. You are not to talk about any legislation, any ideas that come out of this office. Everything stays here, because that has happened before where a staffer came in, just, hey, how you doing? Having a conversation in the office. They either saw what they were working on, or there was reason to believe they knew what the other staff was working on, and they quickly did a bill request, which they can do, and then which has to be a little different, and then they introduced the legislation. So they took it away from that office. So that's why it's so important to keep all of that in-house. So community members, this is what's most important. So the community members and organizations, like Junior League, SPAC, for instance, they need to work through the legislators, not directly with LSB. This ensures that the policy ideas move forward. And I love starting a bill or some kind of policy or anything from the very start. I call it a mustard seed. So I would always talk to our constituent director and make sure if there's any constituent issues that keep coming up, or there's issue that might be a really good idea for the legislator, develop that issue. find out why it's important, and bring it to the legislator in order for that policy idea to move forward. And that's how it works. If you have an idea, the best place to start is your own personal legislator within your district, whether it's a House or a Senate member. And that's usually how it gets started, not from contacting LSB directly. So since January of 2023, each legislator may submit up to 5 bill drafting requests each month. It used to be more than that. It was constantly, reaching out to LSB through an electronic system. Everything's in writing, and that is given that system through offices only. And so the Legislative Council rules provide for certain exceptions, and the designation of 3 bill requests as personal priorities during the 2-year legislative cycle. So if there is a priority that an office would like to gear towards, let's say they have a priority with veteran issues. Well, I'll show Senator Kleinfeld, for example. She is the chair of the Veterans and Emergency Services Committee on the Senate side. So if there's a really big veteran issue that would help benefit veterans statewide, and she wants to get this introduced, and let's say the office already used all 5 bill drafting requests for the month, but this is really important, this is really timely, she can have a personalized bill request as a priority. And it's important that that legislator brings it forward to the policy team within their party in order to flag the majority leader and the floor leader. That's what's most important, because they will help assist guide that priority. So it's like I said, it's important to know it's nonpartisan. LSB is objective, they're accurate, they're very confidential, and they provide wonderful analysis. So I relied on them so heavily in drafting any bills. Is there any questions so far? Great. Before we move on to the other side, it's just so important to understand that this helps advocates direct policy ideas to the right place, which is the legislators, not the Bureau. Okay, so these safeguards that protect neutrality, these safeguards ensure the Bureau serves democracy, not politics. So drafting services never imply endorsement, and all legislators receive equal access regardless of party or issue. Drafting materials are generally protected, like I said, from disclosure until introduced, allowing legislators to develop those ideas openly and responsibly. So developing these ideas normally are through research within the office, constituent feedback, which is always great, especially during committee and testifying. If you have actual constituents within your district to come and testify on an issue, that's just a added plus. That's the way to go. So like I said, a mustard seed is wonderful because you can start it from scratch. You research, you reach out to stakeholders, constituents to develop an idea. That's usually when I presented it to the legislator, and then the legislator kind of developed that idea a little bit more. Then we reach out to LSB for the process of a professional, fair, and transparent way to draft a bill. How is a bill crafted? So, like I said, the legislator first identifies an issue, and could be through us, it could be through a constituent, just something that you found in an article, which has happened. And it's good to engage all of your team within that office, or all of us, in order to develop an idea before it's presented. So the research staff at LSB can help with that research service. But again, that goes through the office, and you can flag the office and say, you know what, maybe we need to research this a little bit more. And then Just so you know, even though there are 5 bill requests each month, there is unlimited research questions that can be asked through LSB. So it's not taking anything away from the legislative office. You're working in tandem, you're working as a team, because if you're not sure, um, you know, what's the depth of the research, have an attorney help through the office. That is a great gateway to make sure the bill is solid. So after receiving ideas from those diverse sources, then the legislator decides, is this even needed? So, and then once the review and revision is done, of course, there can be many reviews, many revisions of a bill. A lot of times offices, and I know stakeholders always appreciate reviewing the bill before it's introduced. That is so important. There are many offices who do not want to get this bill out in the public for whatever reason. They don't want stakeholders to read it. So they'll just introduce it without that. And then you could come up with some challenges where you're constantly redrafting, changing, and you have many different versions of a bill. So what a bill includes? Well, it includes the title and the purpose. It includes the enacting clause, sections and amendments, and the effective date. So a lot of times it's 90 days after the bill has passed both chambers and enacted. So understanding how to read a bill helps advocate and track changes. They help explain impacts and communicate clearly with stakeholders. So like I said, there may be many drafts before a legislator determines the bill is ready for introduction. And once a bill is satisfied with the draft, once a legislator is satisfied and ready to introduce it, the LSB Legal Division will deliver a blueback. And so it's important to understand these legislative drafting terms and what they mean. So a blueback for bills or an orange back for joint resolutions can be submitted for introduction. Even after receiving a blueback or orange back, a legislator can still make changes to the bill prior to submittal to the clerk of the House or the secretary of the Senate. Once that's done, it's done. Let's say you introduced a bill, it became to the point where it's about ready to be like made into law. It's gone through the chambers or it's gone through one chamber and changes need to be made. Well, that's a star run. The bill before total introduction. Sorry, misspoke. So the revised draft replaces a bill before introduction, and that's the star run. Oh, whenever I had to ask for a star run, that was the worst. I never wanted a star run because you want to do your due diligence before. And there are internal drafting terms you may hear when working with the legislative offices. You don't need to memorize them, but recognize them helps you follow the process and communicate clearly with policy makers. So a double set. Whenever I worked with LSB, you can either request a single set of bills or a double set. I always personally, from working in the legislature for many years, I liked requesting a double set because you're requesting a Senate version and you're requesting a House version. You have both of those versions and you can dictate how they move through the chambers. So you can talk to your legislator, say, you know what, let's do a double set and maybe identify a legislator in the other chamber who might want to champion it, but deciding between those offices who's going to take the public act once it does go through. It will help move the bills simultaneously in the chambers. Let's say you don't want a legislator to have the other bill in a different, or the same bill in a different chamber. You can still request a double set. The legislator can, but hold that other double set and maybe file it away. And that ensures that no other bill from the chamber from any other party can request the bill, the same bill. So that's always good. It kind of covers your bases, which I always did. There has been mistakes where people have introduced a bill, someone else loves that bill, they change a little bit of the language, let's say they even change a sentence or a few words, they can introduce the bill in the next chamber and move it through to get the PA. So you have to be careful about that. And reintroduction. There were certain legislative initiatives that were so important that we had that bill and we moved it through one chamber or two chambers. Well, it never got passed. It never made it to the floor, and it never became, an enacting law. So it's important, let's say, to have that. Like, I know that we have, some bills that are currently it passed one chamber, hasn't passed the other chamber. Let's say it was never taken up. There can be a reintroduction phase, and each legislative office puts a list together of those bills that they want back. It's open to any legislator. If somebody else likes your idea, they will take the idea. So as a legislative director, I sat over at the LSB. I got there at 4:30 in the morning. As soon as they opened that ability to reintroduce or to grab the bills that you got from last term, just to have a list of all the bills that you'd like to have again. And if you're there first, you ask for it first, you get it back. And then the process starts again all over. So,
Renee, are you willing to take questions during the presentation?
Absolutely. Yep.
Angie, you had your question, or you had your question up, your hand up.
I did, and my question is up. Now I forgot. You went past the slide. What is the one where it's like goes into both chambers at the same time? Identical set. You were just talking about that.
Yep, it's a double set.
Double set, yes, that one. Is there ever a time, like it seemed like there were quite a few advantages to taking that route. When would you not take that route, or what is the disadvantage? Is it extra work? Could you talk on that?
I would say the disadvantages of not taking the double set route is you could lose that bill altogether. Let's say, for example, well, I can use this, what's actually happening now, because when I work there, I'm no longer in the legislature, but there is an opportunity. Anyway, before, both chambers were democratically controlled. Now we have the Senate democratically majority, and then in the House we have a Republican majority. If you don't do a double set, let's say, for example, a Democratic senator introduces a bill, it's easily moved through the Senate chamber, then the only single set moves to the House, or the other chamber gets wind of it. Okay, a Republican in the House loves that bill. What they're going to do, because a double set was not made by that office, whether they forgot to do it and it's just a little check on that electronic LSB form, then that member can take that bill. And because, let's say, the Republican, it's majority, they'll move it quickly through the chamber. It'll either be stalled because we don't want to pass that bill. We want our bill to pass, but they're not going to do it because it's not the majority over in the other chamber. So it's important to do a double set. That way, it's more advantage to the office, the legislative office, to maybe have someone of the like party introduce it also in the House. That way, it's moving simultaneously, or let's say one stalled and the other one moves, and then you have it in that chamber. That's when you put the pressure on the legislators. Look, what we're doing, we want this taken up in committee. This is important. So I always think it's better to do a double set. Many offices, I would say half the offices do, half the offices don't. And a lot of offices that request a double set, they know what they're doing. They absolutely do. So I would mentor a lot of legislative directors. That was really my job, is to help them get their office organized, they would come to me and ask for assistance. And I would always tell them that little secret, just do a double set. You don't have to do anything with it. I used to file it in my file cabinet, but that way it's not taken away from you. Does that make sense?
It does. And would you ever recommend someone not do a double set under certain conditions?
Um, I would say if you want to work in a bipartisan fashion, if an idea comes up and you know that there is bipartisan support, and if you want this to move quickly, especially since the House is there's a lot of stuff going on over there where there's a lot of bills that aren't moving, you could find a partner, someone who's very pro, the bill, very pro. And so ideally you want to look for someone who is, bipartisan in nature. And that way, having a double set, you can give them that double set. And like I said, having a understanding that, you know, this office who came up with the idea wants the public act. That's a big deal, having a public act. Um, or let's say there's two parts to the bill where it's the regulatory part. First, it's the introduction of the idea, and then the implementation of the idea from an office, particular department, whatsoever. That is when a double set would be most advantageous, is if you really have bipartisan support. And then you can talk to the legislative office and say, we know that, you support this in the Senate, for example, and so supports this in the House of the opposite party. So it's bipartisan. We already made sure of that through our advocacy efforts, just talking about the idea. And then you can help guide that office to suggest do a double set, because then this person will introduce, the other person will introduce in the chamber, and then they can divide up the PAs if there's two sections to a bill. That's really the most advantageous for a double set, is when there's multiple parts to a bill. There's, bill whatever 35 and bill whatever, there's multiple parts. That's the most advantage for a double set. Does that make sense? I hope I explained that correctly.
Does. Thank you.
You're welcome. Great question. Okay, so the resolution reference guide. This is for plain and concurrent resolutions, formally express the will of the House of Representatives, the Senate, or the legislature as a whole, only for the session in which they are passed. So joint resolutions must be drafted by the LSB legal division and are processed the same as a bill request. So that is a joint resolution. If there is a resolution that just came out of the office, anything can be a plain resolution, whether you want to recognize someone's 100th birthday within your district, usually it's district focused, or you want to make a statement about a certain federal situation that's happening. There was just a plain resolution made about ice on the floor. That's drafted within the office. You actually draft that yourself, and LSB will assist with the language to make sure it's clear and concise. They like to see it. Also, the resolution likes to be, it should be shown to the majority leader and the floor leader so that everyone can have a knowledge of what's going to be introduced on the floor as a resolution, and they can help support that and make sure that you're fit into that daily agenda. So finding public and legislative materials, there's the link. This is where to find these resources. And so the tip that I would like to say is public legislative materials are powerful tools. They are used to educate, inform, and persuade responsibilities. So these are all the legislative materials that can be found on that website. I wanted to point this out. This is a list of free catalogs. So every office orders up so many catalogs each term, and it comes out of their budget, and that's publicly funded. So they have a section of their office budget that is allotted to the free catalogs. It's important. You can either have them marked with your sticker on it of the legislator and office contact or not. It's a little bit more money out of the allotment to have that little sticker, but not very much. It's very helpful. So these are catalogs that can be provided to you by your House or Senator office. So usually if somebody, a constituent or a non-constituent, calls the office and says, you know what, I heard you have something on domestic violence. I'd really like to have a free catalog sent to me. It can be free sent through the mail. But if it's not a constituent, they will direct you to the correct office because, again, all budget items, including the catalogs, are for constituents only, not for someone else outside their district. So, although it is free. So that's something to be just mindful of. You may not know that. A lot of people just don't know that. So when they go to coffee hours, you'll see a bunch of booklets out that are free to individuals. That's what these are. So pretty much everything, which I love. Gives great information. So here's the process to advocacy. It's important to use this knowledge effectively. So why this matters for advocacy, what SPAC should do with this information. It's important to engage early. Understand how bills are drafted helps advocate engage at the right time and in the right way. Be precise, knowing what correct bill terms are, what and references when communicating, such as the sections, amendments, and effective dates. I can definitely go into a further training for that. That's usually a training I provided to other offices and staffers separately on how to read a bill, sections, amendments, and effective date. That's important. Focus your message. Speak to policy outcomes and community impact, not drafting mechanics. So it's important when we are advocating that we say, this is what we're hoping to achieve, and this is how we'll impact. And in our situation, we are statewide, so this is how we'll impact the state, the individuals within that legislator's district, as well as the state as a whole. And it's great to build relationships with the legislators and particularly the staffers. Staffers work so hard and they're kind of the pseudo legislators. Not many people know that if a legislator is in session and there's a meeting that needs to occur, it's the legislative director that takes that meeting, no matter what that meeting is. They're talking about the bills, which the legislative directors are more familiar with than the legislator until it's at that point where the legislator needs to read it, provide additional information, and all of that. So building relationships with an office is the best, not LSB. LSB does not serve you. So just letting you know that. But you can guide the questions. You can guide, the type of language that the office will then send to LSB. And okay, there it goes. So what do they do not do? They do not attempt or direct to influence LSB staff. That is not something that we want to do. We do not contact them. We do not attempt to influence them in any way. And I think that's a lot of the reason why LSB, I'm doing this presentation rather than LSB, is because they are so strict in offering any kind of training outside of legislative offices. They don't want to appear as they're influencing or directing legislative initiatives from any advocacy group. And that's the main reason. But this training that you're getting is pretty much exactly what they would do for a legislative office. I just know this information and can pass it forward. Asking for confidential drafts or unpublished materials, they won't do that. Even Unless you're working with an office very closely and they want you to see the draft so that you can help provide input on language or anything like that, that's one thing, but LSV will not do any of that. And last, asking for confidential drafts. I already said that. Presenting advocacy positions as neutral legal guidance. So if you're contacting them and you're basically saying, you know, this position, I want to make sure that it's framed in neutral legal advice and or technical guidance. And so our credibility as junior lead advocates comes from being honest, value-driven, and transparent about our perspectives while respecting the nonpartisan role of legislative staff. So just making sure that your position is neutral and not so one-sided as a Democratic position or a Republican position. We are neutral, we are nonpartisan, and that's important. How do we communicate that to legislative offices? Any questions?
Renee, I have a brief question. First of all, thank you so much for this fantastic presentation. I think it will be so helpful as we continue to add our collective tools in our toolbox. Since we have a little bit of time, do you have a brief second to talk about the House and Senate fiscal agencies and what they do kind of on the back end of as legislation is being contemplated?
Yes, yes. So it's similar to asking for a research question. So you're asking for a fiscal analysis, and that's part of the research. If you're wanting to know what is the fiscal impact to a particular department, agency, statewide, anything like that, that goes a long way. It's important to have that already up front. Usually that's presented within the committee itself. Legislators always want to know, that's one of the questions, how much will this cost? And the policy team behind the scenes, they will put together a fiscal analysis, but you really need to kind of guide that request. A lot of times, if they have time, they'll do it on their own. But it's important that, you know, the legislative office request that, because all legislators want to know, how much will this cost the state? Is this a unfunded mandate? That's something that no legislator wants to be behind because it's not going to get a lot of support. So if something brings cost to the state, that's a little more difficult to pass that bill. Whereas if it brings revenue, by all means, the way that we are fiscally in our budget, that would be an added benefit. Does that answer your question? Okay, I'm hoping so. Okay, so advocacy the junior league way, and we're almost done here. So we want to advocate from a position of education, not partisanship. We want to respect institutional roles, processes, and ethical boundaries. Use credible public information to inform conversations and decisions. It's always good to have the facts. Have something to back it up, not just your feelings and your thoughts, what you're passionate about. Why are you? Why is this important? Show us the information that's grounded legally and factually. That's important. That's always helpful for an office to have that. Otherwise, the office has to do it, or, you know, LSB will provide that research for you. Focus on long-term community impacts and sustainable systematic solutions. And important, build relationships grounded in trust, civility, collaboration, and service. Building that relationship with the legislative offices, especially those that are the chairs of particular committees that you have. It doesn't have to be every time you reach out, you want something. You might want to send a card through Junior League and say, you know what, we really appreciate working with your office. Or you could call the office and say, we just want to share what a great job you're doing. we would love to continue to work with your office, or stopping by the office. Our door was a revolving door. And I worked during COVID and all of that. So we were hypersensitive to people coming in the office at that time. But it's a public office. It is your office, and you can come in at any time and just say hi. A lot of times people will come in and they want something, or they'll drop a flyer off or something like that. Especially we have the day at the Capitol, making sure, maybe doing a round of popping in, showing your face, saying, hey, this is when we're going to be here. We'd love to sit down with you. We just want you to know that you're invited to whatever. So that's important. So informed ethical advocacy is how Junior League women lead lasting change. And that pretty much wraps it up. So as SPAC members, your advocacy is strengthened when you understand how the system works. Knowledge is influence. So I now invite your questions and encourage discussion about advocacy and legislative literacy. Any questions? Thank you so much for your engagement and your leadership.
Do we have any questions for Renee?
Well, I always have
Jane.
questions. Sorry, I like to sit back a minute and let somebody else ask, but
No,
maybe I'll
Jane.
just get it rolling. So thank you so much. That was so helpful. And I would love to dig your brain a little bit offline about how to maybe get this thing moving in the House. So I was digging through my book to see what people in the House I know super well that have bipartisan contacts and history of working in a bipartisan way. So my first call is going to be to Julie Rogers.
Oh, yeah.
And,
I know Julie very well.
Julie is so great. She did a panel at one day at the Capitol with Graham Filler, so a Democrat and a Republican, and those two had the most beautiful working relationship in the House last session. And so that just triggered, you know what? I'm going to call her and see if I can get her to find some Republicans on the House Judiciary Committee to help me. So thank you for planting that in my mind. But great presentation. I learned a lot about like the ways that the 4 different ways they can get introduced. And I'll have to ask if my bill got introduced with the double
set.
Yeah, the double set, and just to make sure that piece is covered. And
and let's say, Jane, it wasn't. Let's say it was a single set. They can go back and request the double set.
Okay.
So if nobody else has it, and that's kind of an inside thing. If you come up with an idea, and let's say another office has the idea, and you submit the bill request and it's already been submitted, some other office has it, they're working on it, the similar topic, I then will go through a process of questions as a staffer. Because they can't tell you who requested it.
Right.
The first question you say is it a friendly? That's the question. Is it a friendly? Meaning, is it of the same party? They can tell you that. They can tell you yes or no. Well, if it's the same party, okay, that's easier for us to figure out which office. Is it in the House? Is it in the Senate? They can tell you that. But that's pretty much it. They can't tell you anymore. So like I said, Jane, if it is a single set currently, it can be made into a double set unless someone already requested the other set.
Okay.
But it's a lot of strategy involved in how legislation gets passed, how it gets started, how the idea comes about, how language is formed. It's all strategy. And as advocates, if we're part of the process from the very beginning, that's the best. That's the best. And we could, as advocacy groups, find other groups that are also advocating for the same issue. Bringing that forward to the office is so helpful, because a lot of times that falls on the legislative director who else would support this bill? So you got to shop this bill around, show everybody. It's important. I always worked with stakeholders before I introduced it, and our office was like, "You're one of the only offices that do that." Well, they appreciate that, and that builds great relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. It's very informative and
You're
I
welcome.
appreciate it.
Anytime. I'm happy. Of course, I love this group. I love Junior League. Anything I can do to assist. I'll probably be eventually going back to the legislator. So hopefully things happen and move the way they should. But so I'll always have my foot in it. I'm relatively close with a lot of legislators, a lot of staffers within office. So if you say, "Hey, we're trying to get in with this office," well, I can touch base with a staffer. I'm able to do that. So yeah, any help I can give, I am here.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Jackie, you have your hand up.
Yes, a question for you. When you discuss introducing other stakeholders and getting them involved, how do you do that in a protected way so that your ideas aren't taken from you and then flipped to the other side
That's a
or
really good
opposing
question.
views?
So the most important thing, Jackie, to ensure that that doesn't happen is having the legislative office make the request before you reach out. So it's your idea. You want to house that idea. Well, then you want to share it with the office of a particular legislator. Since we are a statewide organization, going directly to the chair is always best, or the co-chair. But making sure the bill has been requested with LSB, double set, before we reach out to other stakeholders, because the stakeholders could get wind of it. They could bring it forward to their particular legislator and they could do the request, and oh no, there we go. So it's important to work with the legislative office, have all your ducks in the row, having them do the request, and then they can do the research request. They don't have to do the research request before the formal bill request. Get that done first. Then it's yours. And then you can kind of, have some leeway, but also building a relationship and communicating with the office like, "Hey, here's a list of organizations and stakeholders that I'm willing to reach out for you. I'm willing to work with you. How do you feel about that?" Because once a request is made on an idea, a bill, that belongs to the legislative office. That's where that belongs. You're just a stakeholder then. Even though it's your idea, you'll be working closely with that office, probably closer than anyone.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Keila, you have your hand up.
Thanks. Thanks again, Renee. I'm sorry I preempted. I thought you were done.
No. No worries.
I just wanted to add on to your fabulous presentation and say that why it's so important also to work with the executive branch as well. So for my office, like we will work with legislators and LSB as well to create legislation for which, the secretary, in my case, or other state agencies in their case, want to advance their policy agendas, right? So for example, my office works really closely with the Department of Corrections in helping residents who are incarcerated to obtain IDs and driver's licenses on their way home so that they can get back into society and, move on with their lives in a productive way, right? But to be able to enshrine that into law, we had to work with a member of the legislature to get that law introduced and things like that. So it's very helpful to have, we work with advocates in the reentry space to make sure that what we are doing aligns with what they see on the ground from residents who have returned. And we can use our influence to work with our colleagues across the street to get legislation passed as well. So by having a entree with the executive branch as well to talk about specific policies that we're struggling over here. Specific policies that align with that office. That's another way. So even if you don't, I'm gonna say even if you don't, in addition to directly working with the legislature, also working with the executive branch that will ultimately have to implement that law could be another route to getting what you want to get accomplished. So as we've been talking about all year long, it's important to have strong relationships with our legislative friends, but it's also very important to have strong relationships with the state agencies, executive branch, who will have to implement the laws.
Very, very true. Very good point. We always have said the executive office, they do not like to be surprised. So it's important that you not only work with the legislative offices because they're the ones that can introduce the bill. If an executive office has a bill idea, they have to go through the policy team, which then the policy use, their ability to request a bill, however many bills they want. But you can also, like you said, work with the executive office or the department ahead of time and formulate this idea, get acceptance, and that's always a great leg up. But ultimately, you have to reach out to a legislator. Unless it's such a huge idea that affects the executive office directly, I would say, yeah, definitely communicate with the executive office because they'll communicate with the policy team. But important to also find that legislator so that you can then say, hey, legislator A, B, or C, we have also been in contact with the executive office, the Department of State, the, MDOC, all of that. So that's important to know. It's just
And
another
Keela,
stakeholder.
have we told you how amazing you are? Just as SPAC, we're not pandering. We've said it long before this training presentation, but just really want to continue that on. You're such a trooper.
I appreciate you. Thank you, Carrie.
Does anyone else have any questions for Renee? All right, this was an amazing presentation.